Dear Thai, dear community. Xin chào các bác, các cô. For me, I've been practicing since I was 20.
Mm-hmm.
And this question, I think I want to ask from the deep of my heart because it's been let me refrain from theoretical stuff. It's been a question that I've dwelled into for this time.
Mm-hmm.
Is that I've gone to so many centers like this, and most of the demographics, the representation are people who are like my mom's age.
Mm-hmm.
So my question is, how do we make Buddhism more engaged? Because I know in Christianity, Buddhism is very engaged. It's very socially active. And also, how do we make Buddhism more accessible to young adults? So looking at maybe high school onward. Because according to this, it says that we're a drug addict to fame, money, and entertainment.
Mm-hmm.
And so how do we convey a message to young adults that say, well, maybe the happiness that you guys are looking for is really coming from eternal?
Mm-hmm.
For me, I try to look deeply within myself to answer that question. Well, for me, when I was 20, I came to it because I was ready for it. Most of the people in their 20s weren't ready for it.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe I may have answered the question myself, is that people come to religion when they're ready for it.
Mm-hmm.
It's not something that I want to go around and proselytize.
Right.
But I think I wanted to express the question out to everybody here, is that how do we make it more accessible to people my age, and that there's a better message out there than money, fame, and entertainment, according to this.
Yeah. Well, I think you answered part of your own question. I think you recognize that people come to, in this case, the Dharma when they're ready. I really think that what happens is we go through many lifetimes and we keep doing the same things, basically grasping. And at some point, the mind becomes tired. And that's when we sort of look up and start looking around and we say, okay, this cycle I've been on isn't working, so what else is there? And that's when people start looking into the Dharma, for example, or some other religious tradition to try and find those answers. So to a certain extent, that's how it happens. So people will come to it when they're ready. I have seen around the world, though, that young people think Buddhism is archaic, old-fashioned. It's what grandma and grandpa do. All over the world, I've seen this. Of course, there are young people involved in the Dharma and who are interested in it. In fact, just last Thursday night, I took the director of the chaplaincy program in which I'm studying at the University of the West. I drove him down to UC Irvine. And UC Irvine has the largest Buddhist student group of any college in the country. And these are young people, 19, 20, 21, and they showed up with lots of questions. We were talking about karma and rebirth. They showed up with lots of questions. They were really excited, and they're really engaged in this. So there are young people doing it, but I think you're right. I would say that there are probably fewer young people involved in the Dharma than you might see at a Christian church or something. I think some of that, in the case of communities like this, is a language barrier. I think it's more difficult when things at the temple are happening in Vietnamese or Chinese or Korean, and then the kids come in who can chat in Vietnamese in this case, but who can't understand Dharma talks in Vietnamese. That creates a kind of barrier. So that's one of the issues that needs to be addressed. That's what I was trying to address with this program, and we have had some young people come. We do have younger people coming occasionally. But then because they're not being really raised with regular accessible exposure to the Dharma, they're not being raised with that interest, I think. I think that's one of the issues. But there's more happening out there than you might realize. There is more happening out there than you might realize. But even in the convert Buddhist community, which is mostly but not entirely white people like me who've converted to Buddhism, there's talk about how there was this real push in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. There were a lot of young people getting involved, and now they're getting older, and for whatever reason, their kids aren't picking up the Dharma. And we're not quite sure why. We're not quite sure why that is. So my answer is that I don't have a complete answer. But I think in some communities there's a language barrier issue. But otherwise I don't really know. I don't know. Yeah, did you have an idea?
Because I practice Buddhist and learn Buddhist over here and the Buddhist community. So I saw mostly people come here because they experience suffering. So the young people, they have less experience about suffering. The older one, they experience more suffering.
Yes.
That's why I come here for the Dharma. Because when we experience about suffering, even you lost the low parent or something like that, you begin to think about the life and suffering and looking for the way to get out of suffering. That's why the older people, they experience more suffering than the younger one. Because the younger one, they hope many things, they wish many things, so they have not yet experienced about suffering. That's why, older people come here.
Yeah, that's a good explanation for it. I think it's true. While you were explaining that, I was thinking it'd be really hard to explain suffering to some, high school kids in the LA area who are going to go out to a concert and then, they've got a party at their friend's house the next night. I'm like, what are you talking about suffering? I'm having fun, right? That's maybe what's going through their heads. But then when people run into the wall of suffering, somebody dies, they lose everything, whatever, then they start to get a taste of it and they understand what we're talking about. That underlying layer of dissatisfaction can be hard to see, especially when you're young and busy and things are happening and, it can be hard to see. It's the big suffering that makes us stop in our tracks and reconsider how we're living our lives. So you're right, very good.
And I don't think it has to be really only old people come to practice Dharma because of the experience of suffering in the family, but also my generation as well. When I think back, I have very happy life. What we call, was born in loving family and went to school and got married, all happy. But I didn't realize what was really truly suffering until I have my own children. And then I think about how they're going to grow up, become women like myself, and then we'll get married, we'll have children, that's a cycle. And that's how I experience that, so I can practice more and understand every moment that I worry about them. And they will go through the same cycle, just like me. And I really hope, truly hope that by learning Buddhism in English, that's really helped me a lot to communicate with my children. And hopefully that can have them just basic understanding so they can, when they become adult, they can make the right decision and not just put themselves in all the crazy relationships. So I think that's how I learned that from what Buddha talked about suffering. But all that I didn't know until I turned like probably 38. So.
Yeah, I came to the Dharma when I was 12. I was a little strange that way. I was kind of an odd kid, I guess. I remember going to a picnic in high school with some friends and I was reading a book about Buddhism. And my friends were like, put away the book! We're roasting marshmallows! So anyway, there was a question back here in the back.
I agree with him that suffering brings us to Buddhism. But I see another aspect of life. The culture also is one of the reasons. because I was French educated from my childhood, so I spoke French when I was a child. I spoke French better than Vietnamese. So according to the French culture and Vietnamese culture, they have one common point. They train people to be humble. So you always have to be humble. When we say something, we have to say the other people before us, like you and me. But when I was here, I came here, I was shocked when I see that the word I in English is written in capital letter. That denotes an ego. So American people have more or less big ego. And one in a seminar I attend because I work, and we have a seminar, I remember a few years ago, and the author of the book, Food for Soul, I forgot his name, he's quite famous. He said that we have to think big, big, think big, big. I was shocked because that is not humble. Yeah, when you think big, it's not everybody think big will succeed. So if you think you have high expectation and you don't get it, you will be disappointed and you'll be depressed and everything, right? If you don't get what you want, you're depressed. So it's like contrary to what Buddha said, you have to be humble. You have to live good within the 24 hours. It's not like to dream of fame and celebrity. But this author, I want to come to the stage and to tell him, please don't say that to young people. You make young people crazy because of that dream. Dream big, think big. Nobody, weekend, but that is not something realistic. Not something realistic to think big. So I think this part is a culture too. American people, I don't want to make comments, but what observation, I have my observation, American people has big ego.
Yeah. I think to a degree you're right. Our culture is, we see this around the world. There are suffering beings, suffering people all around the world. So all around the world, people are doing this grasping after things. But I would agree that there are some cultures, and probably American culture is one of them, that pushes attachment as a way of finding real happiness, perhaps more than some others. I think that's probably true.
Too much attached to material things. That was American people, because it's a capitalist country. So they push you to spend money. They push you to go to shopping. That's like attached to material things.
Yeah. I think you could make an argument that our culture pushes for that more than others. Unfortunately, we need to stop here so we can do meditation. Thank you, everyone, for your thoughts and your questions.